Hey there, dirt bike people. I'm Chuck from TrueTech, and today I'm going to show you how to quickly yank the engine out of a dirt bike. Now, for some of you, you might think that this is pretty straightforward, but a lot of times when I get engines that people bring in and I put them on my bench, there's a bunch of stuff that I notice that would have made their lives and my life a lot easier. This bike happens to be a two-stroke. The process for pulling the engine out is not a whole lot different on a four-stroke. This one's a kickstart only. An electric start bike is going to have a couple extra wires, not a big deal. The process is largely the same. So I'll show you on this one. And unless something goes really wrong, I can usually have the engine out in about half an hour. Sometimes with four strokes with a lot of wiring, it's a little bit more, but on a two stroke like this, oftentimes it's 20 minutes. This is the very first thing you need to make sure of. If you don't have a clean, organized workspace dedicated to what you're doing, you're going to have trouble later on. This is the first step, and really it's the key to keeping your parts organized so that you know how to put it back together, especially if you've never done this before. First things first, very easy to forget. Drain the oil. Can't tell you how many times I myself have forgotten to do this, and it makes quite a mess on the bench. Anytime I drain the oil, I pull the cap off, and I don't put the cap on until the transmission's filled again. While I'm here, I'm going to pull the kickstart off. There's no need to have the kickstart on the engine when it gets plopped on the bench, and it just gets in the way when you're trying to remove the engine. Now, I've already removed these two bolts because I checked the engine before determining that it needed engine work. So I just put the springs back. 2 bolts, 2 springs, pipe off. If your bike has frame guards, pull them off. Subframe bolts, while you're here, get them off quick. Another thing that I do is I take a bolt off, I put it down on the bench directly under where I took it out from. Now you don't always have to do this, but it's often handy to remove the silencer as well. Most any dirt bike, it's just going to be 1 or 2 bolts. On four strokes especially, the silencer often gets stuck in this area, so it's definitely worth the little bit of extra work to take the silencer off. While I'm over here, I'm going to remove this shroud. I've already removed the seat bolt, tank bolt. Now I'm on the left side. Oh, I've already removed the shifter. I get a lot of engines on the bench that still have the shifter on them. It doesn't make any sense. Take the shifter off. It's super easy. Other shroud. I'm going to turn the fuel off. Now I'm going to remove the fuel line. Fuel tank can come off. So if you have a fuel injected bike, there's probably going to be a fitting or something like that, but same idea. Now I'm going to get at this other subframe bolt. Then I'm going to loosen these upper subframe bolts as well. Just loosen them off, don't remove them. And this is very similar on every model. I do this on almost every dirt bike. Now I'm just going to make a note, because anytime I loosen a bolt and don't remove it off the bike, I make a note, upper subframe bolts, and that's going to remind me to tighten up these bolts because they're not going to be laying on the bench. They're very easy to forget. I'm going to yank the spark plug boot, and I'm also going to pull the spark plug out because that gives me a little bit more clearance in here. It's just another thing that I don't have to deal with while yanking the engine out. So I don't know how I managed to forget to film this, but I did not film removing the carburetor. So as I'm putting the engine back in now, I'm going to do that. On a two-stroke, it's very straightforward. We remove those bottom subframe bolts, loosen the clamp off the back, and then lift it up the subframe. That gives us access to the carburetor. There's another clamp right here, 2 bolts here. The slide comes out. But on a 4-stroke or a fuel-injected bike, you're going to have a little bit more of a complicated situation with the throttle cables. So like on this one, we didn't even have to remove the throttle cables. But on a carbureted 4-stroke, you're going to want to loosen off this 10 mil, loosen that off, and then pull this little cover off and you can unhook the throttle cables. It's pretty easy. In some cases, you don't actually need to remove the carburetor. Whenever I do an engine rebuild, like on this thing, I always do remove the carburetor so I can service it so that my freshly built engine doesn't blow up. But you don't technically need to remove the carburetor in every situation. Sometimes you can just kind of pull it off and have it dangling somewhere. Now I'm going to get at the wiring here. There's going to be wiring coming out of the stator down here. And that will be pretty much the same on every bike. If your bike has a battery, there will be a little bit of extra wiring. I'm just going to follow these wires up. Straightforward, white and white, yellow and yellow. If you think you might have any trouble remembering where that wiring goes, put a little bit of green tape on it, make appropriate notes. I've got my stator loose. Now we're going to drain the coolant. I leave the cap on. Then I'm going to pull this little plug out. That way it doesn't squirt all over the place. Then I'm going to reach up here and open the rad cap. And then you can see it comes squirting out. Now I don't have coolant all over my hands. Now I'm going to remove the rear brake lever because it's just in the way. If you're new to this and you're a little bit worried about taking off too many components and not remembering where they go, you can just take these components and put them in a bag with everything that's associated with them. That can come out. Ooh, Drop the spring in the oil bucket. Perfect. Put that like that, and that'll be very easy. I won't have to go looking all over the place for the parts. Now, every engine is going to have a head stay. A lot of them are very similar to this. I'm going to take this head stay, put it back together. When you have a little assembly like this on reassembly, it makes it a lot easier. Just, oh, I know where this goes. Done. Instead of having 5 different parts that you have to assemble, and this bolt could look a lot like this bolt, and we're not going to mix those up, but what I'm doing here is just making my life as easy as possible for reassembly. Now, there's always going to be 2 rad hoses, unless you're working on an air-cooled bike. What I like to do with these hose clamps is just slide them further up onto the rad hose and then tighten them up. That way I don't have to wonder where they go. On this particular bike, I'm not going to have to remove the radiators. There's enough room in there. On some bikes, it makes sense to remove the rads. I'm going to avoid that if I can, especially if it has rad guards like this. Probably going to save me 20-30 minutes in the end. So now I don't have to look for the hose clamps at the end. Now we're getting pretty close to completion here. I'm going to take off these 2 lower engine mounts under here. Any bike is going to have similar mounts to this. Now, if you have an electric start bike, you're going to need to remove the large positive cable that goes to your starter motor. It often helps to rock the engine a little bit. Ooh. Yeah, this engine mount is a little stuck. I'm just going to wiggle the engine. There we go. Now, the only thing that's left holding the engine in place is a swing arm pivot. And our bench is a mess. So at this point, I'm going to reset. I'm going to clean up all of my tools. Now I'm going to label this chassis. Now I'm going to put everything into this bin. I can do things like this to make my life easier later. Whatever you need to do to make sure that you're going to remember where things go. I can leave this little assembly like this. That's what you need to do. I keep these zip ties that I cut and I put them in here, and then as I put new zip ties on, I throw 1 zip tie in the garbage. The only things I'm not going to put in that box are the things that are too big, like the seat, the pipe, and basically the tank. After I'm done pulling the engine out, I'm going to zip tie the pipe onto the frame. I'm going to put the seat and tank, just drop them back onto the bike. And that way the bike can go in the corner. I don't have to deal with it until parts come back in. If for some reason you can't do that, my rule is that if a part leaves the bench, it has to be labeled. So if I'm not going to store the pipe with the bike, I just put a label on it, and then I put a sticker on the bike that says parts on shelf or parts in the corner, whatever. I just make notes so that I don't have to spend a bunch of time running around looking for things. Because right now I probably have 3 or 4 pipes in different places around my shop. Now I'm going to put this flat jack under there. I'm going to lift it up just a little bit, take the pressure off of that swing arm pivot. Ooh. Now I'm going to tap this over. If it gives you a lot of trouble, you probably want to stop, especially with these KTMs because they have a little rubber insert there. This one's coming out nicely though. Now I don't remove it all the way or else the swing arm is going to move out of the way, and I don't need that. Okay, the engine should be free. Now I just lift it up a little bit, wiggle it. And if this is your first time doing this, you probably will have forgotten something. But I'm just moving the engine over to the right a little bit. Of course, it's making a mess on my bench. You can see it's cocked to the side like this. And most engines, you just wiggle them a little bit, turn them, pull them out. Done. Now for storage, I'm just going to drop this down. I'm going to make sure my slave and my carb slider out of the way. This can just go roughly there. This can go here. And that's good enough for storage. I put this swing arm pivot back through. Now the pipe, put it back so it hangs on the bike. I just do this with a zip tie. The silencer, it can just go in here. Now the engine's on the bench, there's nothing extra, it's empty, no oil or coolant in it, no kickstarter, no shifter. Sometimes what I do is I remove the clutch cover and all of the right side engine components while it's in the bike. And in that case, the bike acts as an engine stand so I can work at it comfortably right in front of me. Especially on a bigger 4-stroke, removing that extra engine mass that's on the right-hand side, all the clutch and all that, can be really handy, and it can help with engine removal just to remove some of that bulk. So if you found this video helpful, I would appreciate a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you want to see what I'm doing on a more day-to-day basis, you can find that content on Instagram. Thanks a lot for watching.